Welcome to the Digital Dreaming Off the Ground podcast. I'm your host, Asif Ali. I'm joined today by a very special co-host. He is an editor, sports writer for FanSided, covering the Raiders, and obviously a podcaster of his own respect, Khaled Abdallah. Khaled, how you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. How are you? Thanks for having me
Good.
on.
100%. Yeah. So let's go ahead and start off. I mean, I saw some of your tweets on the weekend over the Raiders' performance. So first, let's summarize how that game went and kind of your emotions, your immediate kind of reaction to kind of how it all transpired.
Man, it was like watching a car accident in real time. Uh, or a train, going off a cliff, but
Yeah.
going very, very slowly. It's probably one of the worst losses I've ever seen. I've seen a lot as a Raiders fan over the years. A lot of really heartbreaking, disappointing ones, but that is probably the worst, considering how good I thought this team was going to be, considering how they played last week, and everything that's at stake this season. So, yeah, it was just a slow, painful death watching that game.
And the thing about it is that obviously the Raiders, the way that they played last week against the Chargers, very good Los Angeles LA Chargers team. You expect some of that momentum to carry over this week, and they really had them, right? I mean, my last guest who I had, Jason Wilson. Actually, it wasn't my guest. I was on his show last week. He's a Falcons fan, right? And we kind of saw that happen last week with the Falcons, where they had a very big lead heading into the second half. The Raiders obviously had everything going for them, heading into the fourth quarter, but they just left their foot off the gas. And it's just, I mean, I don't know. It's also, I mean, the play selection, the play calling was very much in question from my perspective. I think Josh, obviously, this is not his first rodeo, but it's kind of like I feel like it's his first real rodeo because he's kind of got his legs wet. He's fully kind of gone through the assistant coaching kind of experience. He's paid his debt, and you'd expect to see some improvement. We did see it obviously the opening game. Obviously, Devontae Adams, he's on my fantasy team, so can't really say much about that, but. I mean, it's just it's funny because the big headlines obviously not just the comeback, but the after the game, the fan hitting Kyler, right, when he was probably just an overzealous kind of Cardinal fan, just going like that. That's my opinion. You don't have to agree with that or not, but I mean, I just don't know what happened. I thought the Raiders had this one in the bag and they're going to be 2-0, so it is what it is.
Yeah, they just, I mean, everything you said, right? The play calling was in question. I mean, you go back and I made sure to rewatch the game, at least the second half, just to kind of see where things went wrong. And it was a lot of little things that had added up, just a lack of execution, a drop pass on 1st and 10 that would have made it, 2nd and 4, things like that. They just pile up over the course of a game. I wrote an article this week called Studs and Duds. And one of the duds, of course, was the Raiders coaching staff, and in particular, the defensive coaching staff for not rotating the defensive line. When you have a mobile quarterback like Kyler Murray that's going to play schoolyard ball and is going to run around in circles for, 10, 15 seconds in a play, you want to use the full depth of your defensive line. And then you come to find out that, Max Crosby and Chandler Jones played like 90% of the snaps. And there was almost 90 defensive snaps. So I'm sure that's something that they're going to take into account when they're playing a mobile quarterback in the future. But it was just a organizational failure. Everyone failed. The coaching, defense, offense, quarterback, everybody, top down. They screwed up.
Yeah, plain and simple. And I think another thing that people are, someone commented on that last play, where basically I think the holding call, right, where they call holding the end zone, the guy barely kind of touched the Cardinal receiver. I'm not sure who the receiver is. I can't remember his name. But then on that play, Kyler Murray is able to scramble and kind of run into the end zone, right? But I think the one of the comments was, I think, to your point about changing the defensive line, like I think Max had a wide open straight lane, like a straight lane to Kyler, but for some reason he kept trying to beat his matchup and spin around. And I wasn't really too sure about what your take on that was, but I thought that was interesting, to kind of rewatch it and see that again.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably Crosby's, I don't know, 78th, 79th snap of the game. I'm sure he was exhausted.
Yeah.
And he's what, 6 inches taller than Kyler Murray. So, it's hard to tackle a guy like that, especially an elite athlete. Like, we know Kyler Murray, whatever you might think of him as a quarterback, he may be one of the best, if not the best athlete at the quarterback position in the NFL. So he's not an easy guy to tackle because of that. He's shifty, he's squirmy, he can go under a lot of these tackles. So, and as far as the quote unquote hold that happened in the back of the end zone, it was an awful call. It was a phantom flag that came out of nowhere. But at the same time, if Crosby makes that tackle, 20 yards in the backfield, we're not having this conversation and the flag probably doesn't get thrown. So yeah, it was just a failure. You can't leave things in the hands of the officials, especially when you have a 20 point lead at halftime and then up, I think it was 16 going into the fourth quarter against a team that looked horrendous in week one. So yeah.
100%. No, I agree with all your points, and so obviously now we're going to flip gears now, kind of actually no, let's stay on the Raiders for one more, kind of talk about the ending and when the fan that hit Kyler. Did you think that was intentional? Because when I was watching Undisputed this morning, Shannon Sharp said that he thought it was intentional. Like the fan was just overzealous, he had too much to drink, and he wasn't trying to. But he thought the guy was a Raiders fan. But I mean, to me, it looked like a guy who basically tried to go for the shoulder pad, and then he just whacked him in the face because it's just where he was, kind of behind the other guy. And kind of obviously wanted to go back and fight the guy. But kind of, what was your take on that? And obviously, because Shannon Sharp made a really interesting point about Raider Nation, kind of how Raider Nation was at the Coliseum back in the 90s. And so obviously the topic now is obviously the Raider Nation, kind of the mantra of the black hole is kind of carried over, right, to Las Vegas. But kind of, what do you think? Do you think that hit was intentional, or kind of what was the kind of takeaway from about that?
I think it's a complete non-story.
Yeah.
It was a really, if he was trying to hit him, it was really awkward. It looked like he was trying to high five him, or at least, hit him on the shoulder pads, which is a very common football celebration. And obviously Kyler's moving around. It's not like he's stationary. And I think if he was trying to hit him, he would have threw a punch.
Right.
So I think it's a non-story. I think, even if the guy is a Raiders fan, it's not like he was really trying to hit him. So yeah, it's just much ado about nothing.
Much ado about nothing. Yeah, I mean, he was smiling the whole time. If he was a Raiders fan, he would not be smiling. So especially at that game. So now we can switch gears now to the Niners, because obviously it's the polar opposite was true for the Niners. And I'm interested to get your take on this. This is the first time I'm going to talk about this on the podcast, right? Because the question obviously heading into the season was, is Trey ready? Is Trey the real deal, right? Last week against the Bears, he didn't show too much. He had 190 or 200 total yards rushing and passing, and a pick, and they obviously lost that game. When Jimmy came in, it almost, and obviously, I mean, I feel horrible about Trey and his injury, but when Jimmy came in, it just felt like the offense had more rhythm. The passes were getting to where they need to go. There's a tight zip, those tight windows Jimmy was able to hit. Obviously he did actually throw a few almost picks, right? But I thought ultimately, Jimmy is just, I mean, and everyone and if Niner fans listening, I mean, sure, whatever, you can chastise me, whatever, right? But I mean, essentially, I honestly think Jimmy was just more ready for this season, just this season alone. And Trey, obviously, being thrown into the fire. We had a very small sample size last season with the 2 games, right? They played. But I just think that, I don't know why Kyle and Lynch were so kind of rushed to kind of put Trey in the mix. Obviously, they gave a lot of draft capital to get him, right, to get him a number 3 overall. But essentially, I mean, the Niners, with Jimmy, they just look like a team that's, this is a team that's built to win now, right? So essentially, with Jimmy in the mix, I just think that they look like a team that's ready to win now, and they're ready to pick up where they left off, and ultimately, hopefully, have a reverse outcome this end at the end of the season, which is yet to be seen. But kind of, what is your take about obviously Trey and obviously his injury, and kind of, did you think that he was rushed into the starting position for this season?
No, not at all. I mean, at this point in his career, he's a second year guy. He had a chance to sit and learn. I know he started, I think, 1 or 2 games last year because of injury. But when you take a guy that high and you give up all that draft capital, you need to see what he can do.
Right.
And having a good to great quarterback on a rookie salary is one of the ultimate, kind of cheat codes in the NFL, because you can build out the rest of your roster because your quarterback that, in a few years is going to be getting paid $20-30 million a year is, making a fraction of that. So I think they made the right decision. I think we know what Jimmy Garoppolo's ceiling is, and that's a guy that he's essentially a game manager. and they wanted more from the quarterback position. And I think they're well within their rights to do that, especially when you draft a guy that high and you give up so much for him. So I don't think it was rushed. I think it was the right decision. And obviously, it was also the right decision to keep Jimmy Garoppolo just in case something like this would happen. And as far as week one goes, I think you can throw that out. Nobody looked good that day. It was just an incredible bad weather day.
Yeah.
Um, and even in this game, he got hurt, a little, I think 2 minutes before 2 minutes left in the first quarter. So he didn't even get a chance to get rolling, really. So I think you can't even really evaluate him in that situation. But now that Jimmy Garoppolo's in, we know what he can do. And this team is probably comfortable with him. And I think they were going through some growing pains with Trey Lance, which is normal, right? Because it's a new quarterback, a new cadence, a new voice, new talent, new abilities, new personality. But they can just kind of pick up where they left off, which was a few plays away from the Super Bowl last season. So in the grand scheme of things, in the 3 years, 5 years from now, maybe this isn't the best thing for the 49ers, but in 2022, I think this is the best thing that they can do.
100%. No, I do think it's the best thing. It was really to your point about the insurance policy. I think that was crucial. I think, obviously they tried to see the market when Jimmy announced his shoulder surgery. It kind of softened the market quite a bit for and obviously there's a lot of quarterback movement this offseason, and so I do think that there's a lot to be said. There's a lot of truth in your statement, obviously, of kind of having that insurance policy. I think it just the cards were dealt in the Niners' favor to basically, retain and resign, But then now let me ask you the question though. Obviously, with Shanahan had a really dodgy press conference yesterday, right? About kind of when they're feeling questions about his decision to run Trey, straight up the middle, kind of like what Josh Allen did, so routinely. And actually, after the Bills, dominant game, the blowout win yesterday, the commentators on I believe, yeah, on ESPN, we're also analyzing, is Josh Allen's longevity going to be as high as we think? Because we saw in the past with Cam Newton and other quarterbacks who are big and ready built, when they take those types of hits, in the game, and they're not really going out and sliding, they're really just they're taking contact head on, right? It really does shorten their career. What do you think about Shanahan's kind of play calling? And do you think that obviously with Trey, that it was a direct result of Shanahan's play call, and kind of with Josh Allen, kind of, what do you predict? I mean, kind of with that, because I mean, he hasn't really changed his style either. I mean, he's basically, I mean, they respect him enough as a passer to where he's basically able to kind of draw off the defense and hang in the pocket, and that if nothing's there, he can take off, right? But I mean, he's still taking some pretty big hits.
Yeah, I don't think it's a result of the play calling. I mean, he has a big, strong mobile quarterback, and he's going to call plays like he has a big, strong mobile quarterback. He was making those play calls with Jimmy Garoppolo as well. I think later in the game when Jimmy scored that rush up the middle, it was a similar play call where Jimmy ran up the middle. It wasn't even a QB sneak. I think it was a slight rollout to the right, and then he rushed up the middle, took some contact. So I think this is just kind of what's expected from a Shanahan offense, and they need a quarterback that can take those kind of hits. And the injury itself was kind of a fluke injury, right? He fell on his ankle and it got rolled up. It's not like he got, lit up by a defensive lineman or a linebacker and, broke a rib or something like that. Like it was just kind of a freak accident where his ankle got rolled up on. So I don't think you can fault Shanahan for that. He's playing to Trey's strength, which is, being a big, strong athlete that can make these kind of plays. And he's going to continue making those calls. Maybe he's a little less likely to do so because Jimmy's not the athlete that Trey Lance is, but we know that he can make plays with his feet, and that's a big part of this offense. As far as Josh Allen goes, he's still young. Obviously it's a concern. You don't want your quarterback putting his shoulder down and trying to run over linebackers and DBs. So hopefully he smartens up and he realizes that you don't need to win the game on every play. But it's nice to have that in your arsenal, right? If it's, 4th and 2 in the AFC Championship game and he needs to run over a 250-pound linebacker, it's good to know that he can do that. Or 190-pound DB. So, it's good to know that he can do that. But I think a lot of the guys that have played long careers, Peyton Manning before the neck injury, obviously Tom Brady, they know that the key is to not just not get hit, but to know how to get hit.
Right.
And I think Josh Allen, with time and some of that wisdom that he's going to get from playing longer and longer. I think this is only his 5th year in the NFL. He'll smarten up and he'll learn that, again, he doesn't need to knock someone out on every rushing play, and he can, fight for save it for the next down.
100%. No, I do think that, I agree with you on Shanahan's play calling because the reality is, I think Trey he's very limited in his passing ability. I mean, we saw it against the Bears last week, and we saw it. I mean, we honestly saw it before he went down with the ankle injury. I mean, yesterday or day before yesterday, right? Or yesterday, right? Yesterday, right? So, anyways, I mean, it's just, I mean, it's one of those situations. And if you remember when Joe Burrow got injured his rookie season, everyone was calling for Zach Taylor's head, right? Like, oh, Zach Taylor, like, what was he thinking? Da, da, da. And Coach JB, if anyone who here watches, Last Chance Coach JB, Coach Brown, was basically on his podcast saying that, hey man, freak injuries happen. Troy Aikman, his rookie season, they went 1-15. He took so many hits, right, in his rookie season that he couldn't even remember most of the season. And it's one of those things where it's like you really have to kind of get your legs wet, and these injuries happen a lot. I think that but the reason why I brought up Josh Allen, because Shanahan kept referencing Josh Allen in his press conference. Buffalo runs it with their QB, so let me educate you all, right? But I do think that you're right in the sense that it's not just because it's working right now, that doesn't mean it's a sustained recipe for success. It's just something that you can do while you have and I mean we saw it with Kaepernick, we saw it with RG3, so I mean I do think Shanahan some of the criticism he's getting is I mean it's valid to the point, right? But I do agree it's a freak accident. These things happen. It's the NFL. So
yeah, and I just want to point out, I mean, people use Cam Newton as an example of why you shouldn't do this, but the guy played 11 years in the NFL.
right.
Maybe he's playing longer if he doesn't have some of the maybe attitude issues, or maybe because if he accepts a backup role, he could still be in the NFL. The guy also took a somewhat subpar Carolina team to the Super Bowl playing
Right.
that style. So it's not necessarily that this is a recipe for disaster. It's like you said, fluke injuries happen, and you have to play to the strengths of your quarterback. People are maybe worried about a guy like Lamar Jackson, but he's going to play football the way he knows how to play football. He's going to do it very well, and that's by running the ball, maybe not initiating contact the way Josh Allen does, or some of these other bigger quarterbacks, but you can't change a guy's nature or his talent or his skill set. If that's what he brings to the table, you have to take advantage of it. Obviously, if it's the first quarter against a very bad Seattle Seahawks team, you don't want him to try to run some dudes over for a couple extra yards. But again, having that skill set and that tool in your arsenal can make a big difference in winning games.
100%. 100%. So kind of, with the last kind of, I guess, 5-6 minutes of this kind of this podcast episode, I want to ask you, who were your biggest standouts from this past weekend, and what are you looking forward to? Did you learn anything new, right? And what are you looking forward to for week 3?
The biggest standout, a couple of them, Amon-Ra St. Brown from Detroit.
Yeah.
He's incredible. I mean, he was a fun story last year, but he looks like he's here to stay as one of the elite receivers in the league. Stephon Diggs and the entire Buffalo team. I think we knew Tennessee wasn't that good considering how they played in week 1, but they got 2 back-to-back beatdowns. And so Buffalo looks very clearly like the best team in the NFL. They get a good test in week 3 against Miami in Miami. So that should be a fun game. And it's a shame that's not the primetime game, because that sounds like a lot of fun. And then it just was a crazy week of NFL football. And it's one of those weekends where you realize, like, this is why football is king. This is why the NFL is king, because, you can look at all these games. Oh yeah, the Browns, they'll beat Joe Flacco and the Jets. No big deal. Oh, the Raiders, they should beat Kyler Murray and then the Cardinals at home. Miami, Tua looked a little shaky this week. He'll probably look even worse against, a decent Baltimore defense. And everything just gets flipped on its head, and it's the best drama on TV. You never know what's going to happen. It's full of surprises. So I'm excited. Next week, I'm definitely excited for the that Miami Buffalo game. I think that's going to be the game of the week. And then, of course, I'm excited to see. I don't know if excited is the word. Maybe anxious to see how my Raiders do against a Tennessee team that looks ready to roll over. So maybe we'll see Malik Willis next week. Who knows? But yeah, it's the NFL, man. Every week is just full of surprises, and it keeps us interested.
100%. Kind of to your point about Stephon Diggs, I was down my fantasy team. What was it, 90 to 175? And Stephon Diggs and Jalen Hurts. Actually, that's what I learned this past weekend. I think Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are for real. I mean, that team is for real. If anyone had any doubts about Jalen Hurts, I mean, you don't question him anymore. On prime time, he delivered against a very good Minnesota team, right?
Yeah,
Jalen
and
Hurts, yeah,
I think they don't play a good team for I don't know another 8 weeks or so. They
yeah.
got a I think from listening to all the preseason pods and reading stuff, that was one of the reasons people had Philadelphia ranked so high as a potential even number one seed in the NFC was because their schedule was cake. If you look at it, they get Washington next week, Jacksonville, Arizona, Dallas, and then a bye, and then they get Pittsburgh, Houston, Washington again, Indianapolis, and then Green Bay in week 12. It's not common, but 10-0 sounds very feasible going into Green Bay. Obviously, there's trap games in there, and you never know. Again, it's the NFL. Nothing is ever exactly what it seems, but yeah, they definitely look like a legit contender for that number one seed.
100%. Obviously, in their division, the NFC East. I mean, that's it's all. I mean, besides the Giants, who are kind of a surprise team this year, I think the Eagles are looking like the favorites to win that division, especially with Dak being out and
For
Washington
sure.
being Washington. So yeah, and obviously my fantasy team. Just to kind of wrap up, I mean, the fantasy from my end, I was actually down. So I was down 90 to 175, and I had Jalen Hurts, Stephon Diggs, and Derrick Henry as like my last three kind of players, and then Stephon got me 44. Jalen got me 33. And then obviously then Derrick Henry got me like kind of like a 9 or 10, maybe something pedestrian, and I ended up winning by 3 points. So I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you never know. The NFL is just full of surprises, like you said, week over week. And I'm definitely excited. I think the Niners, obviously on prime time. I mean, we have a big one against Russell Wilson, who's 16-4 in his career against the Niners. In Denver. Obviously the Broncos are, I think, are favored by 2.5 or something around there. So I mean, I'm looking forward to that game. I do think that we do match up well, and I think Jimmy might. I mean, he kind of got the rust out, this last game, and I think he'll be ready for that Monday night game. So I'm looking forward to
Yeah, and especially if George Kittle's back. I think even if he wasn't back, I would still pick the Niners and that fearsome defense against a Denver team that has looked average at best.
that.
So, of course, as a Raiders fan, I will be rooting for the 49ers a lot this year because you guys play the AFC West, but definitely rooting for you guys come prime time this Sunday night.
100%. We can use all the support we get, brother. So I appreciate that. All right. Closing thoughts. Anything you want to drop it now.
Man, I just the expectations I had coming into this season for the Raiders, you know, they've obviously flipped that on its head this past week with this huge collapse, but I'm not quite ready to give up on the season yet. The season is longer than ever. This is only year two of 18 weeks, plus, of course, the 7 playoff teams. So that's one of the cool things about the expanded schedule and the expanded wild card is that you're never truly out of the race unless you completely bottom out. So, they have a tough couple of weeks coming up with a trip to Tennessee, and then they get Russell Wilson and the Broncos, who we're not quite sure what they will look like. And then, of course, they get Kansas City in week 5. So a very important 3 weeks. But, if I'm on in a couple weeks and they're 0-4, then, I'll definitely be ready to start looking at mock drafts and see who they'll be taking in the top 5 next year.
100%. Actually, that's one more closing thought. The Jacksonville Jaguars. I had the Colts' defense special teams, and they got me a fat goose egg because Jacksonville just came out of nowhere. So sometimes it only takes 1 year from a lottery draft to kind of get I mean, 1 year with the right coach, who can instill the right system to turn a franchise around. So I mean, you never know. I mean, it could definitely be in the Raiders' futures. But I do think the Raiders are in a position to still compete this year. But we'll see. Like you said, with the strength of schedule. Then to your point about Kansas City, Niners have Kansas City, I think, in week 7. So yeah, we're right after you guys. We got next. So we'll see how that goes.
So go Niners in that one too.
Yeah, go ahead now too. All right, Kyle, brother. Thank you. If anyone wants to follow you, where can they follow you?
You can find me on Twitter at Khaled74. You can also find my podcast at 4040 Vision Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And also make sure to follow at SLS Inc. INC. That is the podcast network where 4040 Vision Pod is hosted. So yeah, tap in with me on Twitter. I'm always willing to talk sports and talk anything else, really. So just hit me up and we'll connect.
100%. Y'all heard it here first. Khaled Abdallah. Okay, appreciate you being on here, brother. And hopefully, when you're back in 4 weeks, that the Raiders are much better than you anticipate.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
100%.